Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back. Has the volume on these been turned up, or is it just more echoey in here with more people? Welcome back, everyone. For those members who've joined us after lunch, does anybody have any declarations of interest to make before we get going? Councillor Hartnell? No, they don't work.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I have a declaration of interest with regard to site Seat 05, insofar as there is a planning application that's live at the moment, and I have been lobbied by the developer. Thank you.
Okay. In that case, then, we will jump straight back in with the Seaton sites, and we first go to Mr. Lane to take us in.
There we go. Good afternoon. So now we're going to talk about Seaton and a few other settlements in the surrounds. So starting with Seaton. Right, I'll just touch on the methodology again, actually, because there's some new faces in the room. So briefly, we've got a methodology for how we selected the sites for allocation. It's a four-stage process. We start with a long list of sites. So that's stage one, identifying the long list. Stage two is sifting out the sites. So sifting out the sites which are complete non-starters with really significant constraints. Stage three is assessing those remaining sites in more detail. And then finally, stage four is actually making a decision as to whether to select the site for allocation. And with that in mind, there's sort of two top-down issues to factor in. There's the overall district-wide housing and employment requirement, the spatial strategy, which tries to direct development to the most sustainable locations, and then the more detailed site assessment work done for every site, which picks out those issues for each site in greater detail. And by factoring in those three sort of issues, it's a decision as to whether to allocate the site. So yeah, starting with Seaton. So Seaton is a main centre in the emerging local plan. So it's tier 2 in the settlement hierarchy. So it's got a good level of services and facilities and jobs. So the strategy says that we should be seeing a relatively large amount of development here. When you go onto the detailed site assessment, then that can change things. Obviously, Seaton is constrained like lots of our other settlements. So we've got the coast to the south, we've got the River Axe to the east, we've got a rising landscape to the west, which leads to the north as the most sort of favourable sites, but obviously they're not easy as well. You're extending into what's currently Green Wedge in the currently adopted local plan.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Lane. And before we get into the weeds of the site proper, I wonder, Mr. Freeman, as a reminder for committee and for the benefit of members of the public present, whether you could just remind us of the picture with regard to our housing numbers for the emerging local plan.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So members will recall that we're aiming for a housing requirement figure of 20,812 dwellings, but we're currently short of that in terms of the recommended 10% supply headroom. So I think based on the figures so far, I think we started at the start of these sessions with 1.2% of headroom. I think we're slightly up, as I said earlier, so probably nearer 2% at the moment, but still a long way off 10% headroom. And as I mentioned earlier, there's obviously significant constraints, as has been said, with these sites and our ability to meet that. A number of sites are within Green Wedges, national landscapes, coastal preservation areas. Of those sites that officers are recommending, indeed over 1,000 homes are within Green Wedges, which is probably one of the biggest constraints to Seaton within the plan in terms of officers' recommendations. So if those sites are not found to be favourable, then we will need to find other locations where they can go, and those could be more significant in terms of their constraints, in that they could be national landscape which is a much higher level of protection on a national scale of importance in terms of the landscapes. So it's a difficult balancing act of those constraints versus the housing numbers that we need to meet to have a sound local plan and progress with the plan. So hopefully that's a useful overview.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman. In which case then we come on to the first site for consideration this afternoon, Seat 01, Clay Common. And we have a number of members of the public registered to speak. First up, we have Mr. David Morgan. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. I would like to actually support the recommendations in the emerging local plan that this site should not be allocated for new housing or employment purposes. Any development on this site would have an adverse impact on the topography and skyline for this site. In the case of it, it can be clearly seen from elevated viewpoints in Beer Parish. This site is also in the Beer Quarry Caves Special Area Conservation Area, and obviously it is supportive of bat movement, especially as there is no overspill of light pollution into it because it is on the edge of the built-up area boundary. This site also serves as an important fire break between the built-up area and adjacent woodland in Beer Road. And there is very limited access actually into this woodland in the event that there should be some form of wildfire. And I think that's something the site report didn't obviously pick up in its methodology. I would also say this is a site which also attracts a variety of wildlife, and I've actually visited the site on numerous occasions and have obviously seen adders and grass snakes, field mice, foxes, badgers, bats, and even occasionally various species of birds such as owls. So in summary, I support the recommendations laid out in the local plan for this site, that it should not be allocated for housing or employment, and I hope the Strategic Planning Committee will also support these recommendations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. I now have the landowner or developer, Mr. John from Bell Cornwall LLP.
Thanks, Chair Committee. I act for Clinton Devon Estates landowners. I actually think this is a missed opportunity. As mentioned previously, this is proposed to be a main town. This is a site which is close to the centre of the main town, which is well connected to it by a main road and a bus link. It is less constrained than many of the sites which are proposed for allocation in Seaton, in that it's not national landscape, it's not in the green wedge, and is actually topographically, whilst it does have some sensitivities, it is reasonably well constrained. As the gentleman mentioned before, it's got woodland surrounding it on the west, north and eastern side. It sits behind an existing line of housing. So as a matter of principle, I would suggest this is an opportunity site. It is one which has the ability to deliver some housing. In relation to the constraints, it is quite a large site, and some of that land is more exposed than others, the most northerly side from views to the south. So it would seem appropriate to us that potentially only part of the site be allocated for development, and that would still deliver a reasonable yield of housing which would benefit your land supply in a sustainable location. In relation to the technical issues, it is true that it's close to the Beer Quarry Caves SAC. That is an important constraint, but it's not one that is irreconcilable. Some members may recall that Clinton Devon did a very successful development. It's underway at the moment at Short Furlong in Beer. That's right next to that SAC location. And through clever design, bringing in the other land assets that the estate has in that whole area, they can offset that. So that is not a fundamental constraint to development. It is one that needs to be worked at and can be worked at, as proven by Short Furlong. So this is very much an opportunity site. We would be happy that an allocation come forward so that the which limited the overall totality of development across the site. And the spare land on the land could be used for biodiversity net gain, for additional tree planting or whatever to address the environmental and landscape constraints. So given the location, I think this is a good opportunity. It's less constrained than other sites you're proposing. It's closer to the town centre. It's well connected contextually. I think you need to look at it further. Thank you. For the record, my name's Yestin John. I'm the agent for Clinton Devon Estates.
The public speaker lists will be on the website when it is back up, which we are assured should be tomorrow as well. So they will be a matter of public record. Next up, we have the ward member, Councillor Hartnell.
Thank you, Chair. So very briefly, I support the recommendations from officers in terms of this site, largely on the grounds of the sensitivity regarding the landscape, the deliverability of the site, and also the close proximity to the coastal protection area. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hartnell. Short and sweet, just like we like it. Okay, that brings us then to committee. Councillor Ingham.
Thank you, Chair. I want to understand the report first. On page 174, opportunities. A reduction of site size towards the southern and eastern boundary could be considered adjacent to existing built form to reduce landscape impact. Woodland planting across the remainder of the site would enhance landscape character and reflect surrounds. Whether you like it or not, that ties in with what Mr. Johns was saying to us. And then you go to the next page, 175. If whole site is not suitable for allocation, could a smaller part be allocated? No. Even limited development to the southern part would cause landscape harm. Can we make our minds up on what the advice is, please?
Mr. Freeman, Mr. Lane.
Well, through Chair, I'm not sure it's a direct contradiction. I can see what Councillor Ingham's saying, but I think the reality on the ground is that it's quite a steeply sloping site from the lower parts upwards. The lower parts are naturally going to be less harmful in the wider landscape, but I think what we're saying is even that in itself would be harmful, naturally less harmful than the higher areas, but we think designation of any part of the site would be too harmful in landscape terms. So that's the crux of the issue. Apologies if the wording's not sufficiently clear.
Sorry, coastal preservation area. Is all of that site in it, or is part of it not in it, not visible from the sea, and therefore more acceptable than the rest that is clearly visible from the sea?
I think the answer is probably that officers will have to take a moment to check that for you,
Yeah.
Councillor Ingham.
Do you see, Chair, the reason I'm checking on that is because if their small area is arguably not in the coastal preservation area and it could go forward, then I take the point of the agent that said that's amenable to them. But if it's all in the coastal preservation area, then we still got to cross it off the list at this stage, can't we? And then we can move on.
Yeah, so just for clarity, what I've got on the screen, hopefully you can see that is the site in this area here. I've got the contours on, so you can see the site rises from 60 metres above sea level here up to 80 at the top, so that's quite a significant gradient for a relatively small area. And then the vertical blue hatching is the coastal preservation area. I should point out while I'm talking that's the current coastal preservation area, but I don't believe it's proposed to change in that position. So it is all within the coastal preservation area.
Thank you, Councillor Ingham. Councillor Ledger.
Just to say, Chair, I propose that we move on.
You certainly can. Does anybody want to second that? Councillor Ingham?
Chair, I second that because we have to see how we deal with the recommended allocations. And if some of them are crossed off the list, perhaps this one has to come back on at a later date. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Ledger, briefly.
It's just to say it may be beneficial to explain to the members of the public for the afternoon session
Yes.
the difference between
Yes,
rejection
indeed.
and moving on.
Yes, thank you for reminding me, Councillor Ledger. On that point, just to explain the motion that Councillor Ingham has just made, the legal advice we've had from Mr Hunter, our planning solicitor, is that rather than voting to reject sites explicitly this afternoon, committee should instead be voting to, as we're terming it, move on and then round up the process at the end with a rejection of all the sites that we choose not to allocate. The rationale for that is if we don't meet the government's numbers and we put together a plan that is substandard in that regard, then we won't be able to move forward with it. It will be effectively dead on arrival. So by the time we come to the end of the site selection process, we have to meet those numbers. If we're voting to reject sites at this stage, then legally we're tying committee's hands and we couldn't come back round and revisit. So that's why you've just heard a motion to move on rather than a motion to reject. But that motion having been validly moved and seconded, do any other committee members wish to speak? No, okay, in which case then we have a motion from Councillor Ledger to move on, seconded by Councillor Ingham. All those members in favour? That's unanimous. Okay, thank you, members. That brings us then to site seat 02, land at Barnards Hill Lane, and we have Mr Richard Eyre from Baker Estates.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon. I'm Richard Eyre. I'm Land and Planning Director with Baker Estates. We have already delivered 2 sites in Seaton at Barnards Hill and Rowan Drive, and we are keen to continue our welcome association with the town. Baker Estates has a land ownership interest in this land, and we support and agree with this site assessment and officer conclusions as it relates to this land. Seaton has a need for more housing, more investment and further growth, as well as contributing as a sustainable settlement to meeting the district targets. Members will be aware of the significant constraints around Seaton, referred to earlier, to the east, west and south of the town, such as the marshes, the sea, coastal preservation area, archaeological areas and rising land, meaning that inevitably the suitable development options lie to the north of the town. The site has a landscape context with existing development adjoining and around. We agree with the assessment that existing urban influence and distance from key views reduces the sensitivity of the land to new development. The location of the site means the development of the site does not represent a threat of coalescence between Seaton and Colliford, which is the purposes of the Green Wedge policy. The report refers to access coming from Poplar Tree Drive. It's worth noting that there is a potential alternative or additional access point available of Lime Way, which does have a suitable carriageway width and footpaths both sides. This can be investigated as an access point as part of the resultant application that would come after allocation. Either or both ways, there is a suitable access solution under the control of Baker Estates for this site. This is a sensible and logical allocation to go with the proposed Seat 03 and Seat 05 allocations, which together represent good strategic planning for the town of Seaton. It would allow for effective delivery of local infrastructure and a range of complementary land uses. I'll say more on that when we get to the other allocations. In summary, then there are no fundamental constraints to development. This site contributes to effective strategic planning for Seaton, and the constraints identified can be effectively worked with. Committee can be confident that the site will be brought forward, and hence also confident that in allocating the site, it will be both delivered and delivered well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Eyre. Worth noting, as I've just been reminded by Mr Hunter on my left, for the benefit of committee and the public, Councillor Ledger's left the room as he has an effects and prejudicial non-registrable interest. He has a conflict of interest, so he's left the room for the duration of the discussion on this site. That being said, Councillor Hartnell.
Thank you, Chair. So, in relation to Seat 2, I've got a common theme that's going to be running through seat 3 and seat 5 as well. So if you could maybe bear with me on this. So I recognise that Seaton is constrained in terms of where development can happen. We've got the wetlands and natural landscapes to the east, the sea to the south, so it just leaves the north and the west for development, and it puts the north of the town under extreme pressure in terms of delivering future development. I'm sure you'll hear lots of concerns around the environmental impact of development, the ecology, the effects on the wetlands, the back corridors and the impacts on the Beer Quarry Cave back flights, etc. And they're all valid and serious concerns. But my overriding concern for all three of these sites, and it's something that needs to be addressed if we're to push forward with allocating sites here, is around flood risk. Back in October 2021, I believe it was, Seaton experienced flooding that was quite significant, and as a result, Devon County Council, under Section 19 of the Flood and Water Management Act, had to produce a report to highlight to other authorities the impact and the damage that was caused and for them to take action. 31 properties were flooded, which included the school, the hospital, commercial and residential premises. Most of, or a lot of the impact was in the north and the west of Seaton, and it was basically overwhelming of the water courses, whether that was highway storm drains, southwest water sewage drains, just general water courses. So I would argue the drainage infrastructure in Seaton is at capacity. It can no longer cope. It needs investment from South West Water, it needs investment from the County Council, it needs investment from the Environment Agency, and we are waiting for a report to come forward from engineering consultants that Devon County Council has commissioned to produce a report and costings to see if we're eligible for funding for a flood scheme that will tackle some of the challenges we face. So further housing development in these areas, so that includes the site you're going to discuss now, but two other sites, will increase the overall flood risk to existing properties. And I refer to the draft policy 35 in the local plan, which says, with climate change, the risk of flooding, including surface water, are likely to be exacerbated. Development proposals should be safe from flooding over its lifetime without increasing flood risk elsewhere. And it also refers to the National Planning Policy Framework.
That's 3 minutes.
I'm almost there.
Thank you.
It also refers to the NPPF, where it makes clear that development should be directed away from areas at highest risk of flooding now and in the future. So whilst I'm happy to consider the sites for allocation, the flood risk is real and it really needs to be tackled through policies in the local plan, and I would ask the committee to consider those. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hartnell. Before we go any further then, if I just come briefly to Mr. Freeman. One, how are we dealing with flood risk? And two, where is the Seaton Colliford Green Wedge, please?
Well, yes, on the first point, it's important to note that the requirements of our policies in the NPPF will require that any site, the surface water runoff doesn't exceed greenfield levels, and that it doesn't contribute to flooding of adjacent properties. Those are details that would be checked through the planning application process. So they're not so much at this stage, but those are the principles that the planning system essentially works to. In terms of the green wedge, I don't know if we can put HDMI 2 on again. Hopefully that's clear enough. You can see the built form of Seaton in here. We're in this area here. So you can see the green wedge is this green hatched area across the northern part of the town. So yeah, if I zoom in, you can see this site is in here. Hopefully that helps clarify.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman. We have no further public speakers on this site then, so we come to committee. Members. I saw the two of you at the same time, so I'll go Councillor Hayward first.
Thank you, Chair. So bear with me a moment. I first came to Seaton in 1977 when my sister moved into Littlefield, so I remember walking through all of this land and mooching around as a child, so I sort of have some synergy with it. And to the point that Councillor Hartnell mentioned, I remember that weather event specifically, walking up there and seeing the amount of debris and damage that water event had done. I've always personally felt that the green wedge here, if you view a green wedge as partially to protect the character and also to prevent coalescence, the green wedge to the north, effectively between Seaton and Collyford, I could always understand that to prevent that coalescence. The other part, living in a rural area as we do, effectively it's where are you protecting it from? It's simply just keeping it from open countryside. And Seaton is constrained, as Councillor Hartnell says, by the sea to the south and the river to the east. But we come back to this point that's been raised at the last meeting, at this meeting. If we don't plan now, and if each town doesn't play its part, the decisions will be taken out of our hands. And government inspectors and developers will decide where we build. So there has to be a healthy dose of pragmatism here. On the basis that this particular site already is developed primarily around Prince Charles Way and Poplar Drive. Yes, I appreciate if you go north from that road, there's already a restriction from going up there towards Harepath Hill because of the dangerous junction there as you come down that road. But on this basis, for this particular site, I think on balance, I think the benefit in terms of assisting housing numbers and being a site that could sustain a limited amount of development. And again, this is a question, all we're doing is allocating sites. It has to go through the planning process. That's a rigid process. Everyone has their say. Highways has their say. The Environment Agency has their say. Planners have their say. You have to do flood risk assessments. So this is simply an allocation. So on this chair, I'm willing to propose that this site is accepted for site allocation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hayward, and if I may say, well put. Does anybody wish to second that, Councillor Ingham?
I'm prepared to second that, Chair. It seems, having listened to the first presentation, that coastal preservation area wins on this occasion at Seaton in comparison to Green Wedge, on what's special. Because if you want to preserve the green wedges, are you prepared to say, okay, instead we'll build on Site 1 that we just considered, because we have to do it somewhere. It's very difficult, isn't it? Officers are saying to us that the best choices are those ones, as Marcus was saying, north and northwest of the town. I have to say that you've got to do one or the other, and we heard all the reasons why Site 1 should not go forward, and we've sanctioned that. So therefore, at this stage, I think we've got to at least promote allocation of this site. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ingham. Councillor Jess Bailey.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask if Ed Freeman could deal a little bit more with the flood issue in the northern part of Seaton, and specifically comment on what does our strategic flood risk assessment say in the development of this northern, potential northern development of the town?
To be honest, without checking, I don't know off the top of my head. Obviously, the strategic flood risk assessment is phase 1 of that work's been completed, but assessment of specific sites is ongoing. I'm not aware of any particular issues coming out of that work that are relevant to this site, though. There are obviously lots of surface water issues across the district. And as I said earlier, I think this development site would need to deal with its surface water in an appropriate way so that it doesn't make any existing issues in the area any worse. And I think that would be dealt with through the planning application process. It's a detailed design issue, but there is always an engineering solution that can achieve that outcome.
Sorry, just following on from that, are any of these sites being specifically covered in that more detailed piece of work?
I don't think so off the top of my head, but again, I wouldn't want to be held to that without checking. Most of the sites where a more detailed assessment is taking place are sites that are more directly covered by watercourses and river flooding rather than these surface water issues. As I said, because the detailed design would prevent any surface water issues like that being made worse. So that's less of an issue than those sites where the access or close by there is surface water flooding arising from watercourses and fluvial flooding.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman. Thank you, Councillor Bailey. Any other members wish to speak? I'm just going to hold on a second, Councillor Ingham, but nobody else is flagging, so.
It's only a question, Chairman. That's, am I right in assuming that the officers have decided on the number of 40?
I believe that will be an output of our standard formula.
Yes, so that number's generated by an agreed formula that's part of the Housing and Economic Land Availability Assessment methodology that we use that calculates that figure. So ultimately through a planning application process, it could be slightly more than that or slightly less than that, depending on the detailed design, but that's sort of giving us an indication of the potential capacity of the site for these purposes.
Thank you, Chair. I respect that we may wish to have land allocated for, community land use or whatever, open space. But just looking at the housing density immediately adjacent to that, I reckon you could, if you copied that, you'd get 60 on there. And I just don't want us to allocate land unnecessarily, for 40 houses, when in fact we achieve 60, and then at the end of the day we're saying, oh, isn't that nice? East Devon exceeded its housing land supply by 500 because it can't count properly and allocate numbers. Do you see? That's my concern. So I think what Mr. Freeman said has reassured me, because they're using one formula across the patch. Is that right? Okay, then I'll accept that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ingham. Okay, I see no other hands. We have a proposal from Councillor Hayward, seconded by Councillor Ingham, to allocate site Seaton 02. Before I take us to a vote, are there any final comments? No? Okay, in which case the proposal is as I've just said. Those members in favour of allocating seat 02? Unanimous. That's unanimous. Okay, thank you, members. Which brings us then to site.
Can we get Councillor Ledger back?
Oh yes, shall we get Dan back in?
Anyone know where he is?
Thank you, Ben. I'm advised he was lurking outside that door. Seaton 03 then, we have a number of members of the public registered to speak. First, I have objector Mr. Tony Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Councillors, I have to admit that I've come rather unprepared for this site. However, historically, this site has been the subject of planning application in the past. Magna Housing applied for housing on this site back in 12 or 15 years ago now. It was refused then on the grounds of ecology, and it remains an ecologically important site because together with seat 05 and partially seat 02, this is a migrant and foraging path for, in particular, bats. I'm also concerned, and Councillor Hartnell has also touched on this subject, flooding from this site. It's a steep hillside site. And I'm concerned that we will see runoff into Harepath Road. Harepath Road has received runoff within the last year in the flooding incident. And therefore, there is a great public concern flooding in all of this area. As far as a visual impact is concerned, this was one of the fundamental objections to the Magna proposals some 12, 15 years ago. It's peripheral on the northern edge of Seaton, and housing on this site at that time was considered to be likely to interrupt with sight lines for traffic coming down Harepath Hill across into the Axe Valley into the AONB. That's as much as I'm prepared to say, but apart from the fact that I object to this site being retained as a candidate site. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. We have then Mr. Richard Eyre from Baker Estates.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon again. Allocation of this land will be an essential part of the effective strategic planning of Seaton. It contributes towards a critical mass of development that can then provide infrastructure for the benefit of the town. Members will have noted the proposed long-awaited sports pitch as part of our current application now running, and this is part of the mixed-use development proposed cumulatively, particularly on seat 03 and seat 05. This is good planning and what this committee and the local plan should be doing to guide development in the near future. The benefits of development can be realised when strategically and proactively planned and is of a significant enough scale to deliver those infrastructure benefits. We agree with the assessment that the landscape sensitivity is limited and the view's distance from the AONB. Existing developments in the A3052 provide a context within which this land would sit. In terms of Green Wedge, as noted, the land does not lead to coalescence of Seaton with Colliford. The A3052 will be an effective and permanent boundary to Seaton, and which will allow Seaton and Colliford to retain their separate identities, which we know is important to both communities. This is not in a flood zone, so in a high-risk area for flooding, not in the national landscape or the coastal preservation area. The constraints identified can be accommodated and mitigated. The access is onto an appropriate road network, and there's plenty of scope to control and improve the drainage compared to the current uncontrolled situation. So you're taking it from the current uncontrolled situation to a controlled situation through development. And it's worth noting that with our current application, we have satisfied the flood authority, the lead flood authority, with regards to drainage matters. The result of allocating this site would be a logical, well-integrated and well-designed extension to Seaton. Members can be confident that Baker Estates, with our track record of delivering high-quality sites, not least in Seaton, will bring this site forward and result in a desirable development at the gateway to the town. We know that there's been some vocal opposition to this land, but at our planning application exhibition, we heard from many people who are actually in favour. Supporters tend to be less vocal than objectors.
Could I ask you to wrap it up, please, Mr. Eyre?
Okay, but they are out there and may well represent a silent majority. We therefore hope that you would go on to confirm the allocation for this land as recommended by officers. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hartnell. You may want to just reset the mic there so the timer doesn't take over.
Thank you, Chair. So just to reiterate the same concerns regarding flooding, and I appreciate that they're dealt with at the application stage, but this is more of a larger issue that I'm raising in concern to the actual infrastructure being able to cope through the whole town. So that's still valid with sites 03 and 05. I think looking at the sort of strategic position for Seaton, I think there is merit in some development for sites 03 and 05, but taken together. And I think the sites as a whole, they push the boundaries of the green wedge, and there's almost would be more acceptable if there was a partial allocation from both sites 03 and 05. I am concerned that we're losing an allocation for recreation, and we do have a live application at the moment that does include recreation within that, which is a sports pitch. So I think the committee need to be mindful of that. I'm also fearful that if we don't get a sound local plan and we get housing numbers thrust upon us, we'll end up with a very, very dense allocation of housing on this land. And if we look at what we've potentially got in front of us at the moment, is something that's perhaps slightly more within what we want to see, that's less dense, with lots of green space, as much mitigation as possible for the environment, and those sorts of impacts. So I think we're stuck between a rock and a hard place. In an ideal world, seat 03, seat 05, seat 2, they would all be left as they are. And that's exactly what I would want to see. But the reality is we need affordable homes, we need homes for people. So I am amenable to the idea that seat 3 and 5 will have to see some development. But I would like to see it to a minimum, not pushing out right out to the 305 too. And I would like to see recreation included within the allocation, and obviously the employment needs to be retained, because I understand that there is interested parties on the existing allocation in the existing local plan. It's not something I'm particularly happy about supporting, but I'm also a realist. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hartnell. Into committee then. Do any members wish to speak? Councillor Ledger?
Happy to, Chair. I share a lot of the same concerns as Councillor Hartnell. I think a lot of the development you wouldn't want to see across any of the green wedge within Seaton. It's hard to separate this from Seat 05 because they are an application that is meant to be taken together. And out of the two, this is the one that I would be more in favour of seeing development on. I think that the report is slightly misleading, is that it will accommodate the football club. The football club has said that they are happy with the location that they are currently in. They have no intention of moving, and that this would be a secondary pitch used solely for youth provision. So that needs to be noted by the committee. I'm not happy to say that we want to see housing, but I understand the wider context and the fact that Seaton does need to see some form of development, and for that reason, I propose that we approve this site with reluctance.
I think that caveat probably applies to every proposal we've made this meeting and last. Thank you, Councillor Ledger. Does anybody wish to second that proposal? Councillor Ingham, do you wish to speak?
I second it, Chair, and just slightly on that, mindful of looking at 2, 3 and 5, if that one were to go forward, I don't think it helps. I don't want to be too critical of what this council has done, but I don't think it helps when we create a green wedge and then undermine it. It always looks really bad in the eyes of the public. And so perhaps after we finish this local plan, we're going to look at Seaton again and say, what is the intent over the next 50 years? Make it clear, and also make it quite clear what we're not going to do, and try and stick to it, rather than changing the boundary lines of land designations. Thank you, Chair. On this occasion, I'm prepared to, but we must go back and stop doing this, to and fro. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ingham. A discussion for another day, perhaps, but point well made. Do any other members on committee wish to speak on Seat 03? Councillor Parr.
To my mind, the most important point about having the football land for football pitches would be to keep it green. As far as I'm concerned, it would completely change the approach to Seaton if the town was allowed to sprawl right out to the 3052. I think it's really important to keep a green band of open land below the 3052 as the setting of the town.
Thank you, Councillor Park. Question, Councillor Ingham?
Yes, didn't Councillor Ledger say that the football pitches were in site 5, not 3? In 3, oh, that's okay.
Any other members to speak before we go to a vote on this? Councillor Howe?
It's really hard, and we all know the scenario and the situation we're in, but 10 years down the track again, we're going to be looking for another local plan and another housing allocations. So the thing about looking at green wedges and keeping them for prosperity, great idea, it's not going to happen. Houses, provided the population keeps growing, we're going to have to keep producing houses and keep going. So we've got to be realistic. And it's the same with saying you don't want it to hit the 3052. Great, absolutely. But where's this development going to go elsewhere? We have housing numbers we've got to hit. We're low on them already. And we need to find sites. So if you're going to take or reduce sites, you're going to have to find others in the approximately same area to say yes to. And it's really hard and it's really tough. And I don't like it as much as everyone else. But we're here to make the hard choices to try and make this, following Mr. Freeman's phraseology, the best of a really bad bunch of choices. And that's what we're doing. So I think we need to be careful. The only other thing I want to pick up is on flooding. And as Mr. Freeman has said before, any development cannot increase the risk of flooding by law. It's clear. Has to decrease it, or actually maintain it or decrease it. The natural flow of the field off run will be either improved or maintained at the same level with housing on it due to attenuation. So flooding is not an issue in these respects, provided it is done right. Slightly separate question, but nevertheless. So I wholeheartedly, unfortunately, I support the recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Howe. You've provoked Councillor Davey now.
No, not provoked at all. Just a couple of things that jump out at me. One is that this is grade 2 agricultural land. Although I also noticed Mr. Freeman saying a lot of the agricultural land designations are a bit out of date in his submission to the NPPF. And the other thing that I noticed was that it mentions a bat flight path pinch point there. We're making that pinch point really, really narrow, aren't we, if this site is developed out? Is there any mitigation that can be provided for that by, say, having a tree belt or wide hedge along the northern side of the site, bordering the road, so that the back corridor is preserved? Is there anything that can be done there?
Mr. Freeman, I think I'd be right in saying that would be a matter for planning stage. Is that right?
It would be, yes. I mean, through the application process, they'd have to do a habitat assessment and assess the impact on the protected habitats and species associated with that and build in mitigation, I suspect, very much in the form that you're suggesting of designing in a landscaped back corridor route that can helps the bats to navigate their way through the site effectively, hopefully unhindered by the development. And that is possible and has been achieved in other sites on the northern end of Seaton and elsewhere.
Okay, do any other members wish to speak before we go to a vote on CETO 3? No? Okay, in that case then we have a proposal from Councillor Ledger, seconded by Councillor Ingham, that CETO 3 goes forward as an allocation into the draft Regulation 19 local plan. All those members in favour? That's not quite. It is unanimous. Which brings us then to seat 05 on the other side of the road. And we have registered to speak from the public, Ms. Diane Smith? If you just push the right-hand grey button, David.
Sorry
thank you.
about that. I'm also not completely prepared to speak today, but I will do my best. I would like to speak regarding the green wedge between Seaton and Colliford. Natural England states, in response to a proposal to build within Seaton Colliford Green Wedge, that it is not possible to ascertain that such a proposal would not result in adverse effects on site integrity. Impact on the ecology of the wetlands, marshes and sea from increased discharge of sewage, result in further flooding to surrounding housing and to the wetlands, which recently had to close because it became impassable to visitors through floodwater. Would be unsustainable because there is no access to the town centre from this site that can cope with increased traffic, and the site is beyond the accepted 800 metres norm for residents to access services. With regard to the emerging local plan 2020-2040, it is notable that the built-up boundary has been extended to include Seat 05, whereas it was outside the built-up boundary in the current 2013-2030 local plan. I believe the Seaton Colliford wedge should be restored to return the land which has been designated as Seat 05 and also the land designated for commercial recreational use and has remained undeveloped for over 25 years. It should be returned to the green wedge. As a consequence, I am appalled to see that sites 03 and 05 have come up for planning consideration yet again. Site Seat 05 has been considered for development on 3 previous occasions, and since 2012. It went to appeal in 2015 and was refused by the Government Inspectorate. I have to ask, why has this site been included in the emerging local plan as suitable for development? With regard to doctors, dentists and schools, at a time when the NHS is stretched to the point of collapse, should you be considering bringing in some 450 plus people to the town to further exacerbate what is already a dire situation? This would also apply to dentists, schools who are similarly under pressure. It is notable that the NHS in the locality are now opposed to further housing development in the Seaton Colliford Green Wedge, stating that this development will create potentially long-term impact on the Trust's ability to provide services as required. That is a quotation. Infrastructure. The sewage system in Seaton is already at capacity, increasing the population by housing approximately 450 plus in the Green Wedge can only make the situation worse. Some areas within Seaton adjacent to the proposed site have already suffered flooding and runoff. Further development will only exacerbate what is already a serious situation. Natural England has told EDDC that it should no longer grant planning permission to any development that could increase phosphate levels in the River Axe.
Could I ask you to wrap it up, please, Ms. Smith?
A situation that is already causing some considerable concern. Seaton's outstanding natural environmental, especially its wetlands, is its most precious and defining asset, and policies for the conservation, enhancement and sensitive management of the landscape, heritage and wildlife of the area will be prominent. The Axe Wetlands, Dorset and East Devon Coast World Heritage Site,
I'm sorry,
Jurassic
Ms. Smith,
Coast,
could I ask you to wrap up, please?
and surrounding exceptional coastline will be key environmental assets that will be integral to the future success of the town. Thank you.
And your microphone as well, please. Thank you. Next, I have a Mr. Peter Mason.
Thank you. First comment I'd like to make is that the Seaton Green Wedge, as a result of not just this site but CETO3, to the northernmost part is going to be eroded to being almost non-existent. That leaves just the Colliford part of the Green Wedge, which is quite small and really not sufficient to prevent the feeling of coalescence to between the two settlements. I think it's important that the Green Wedge is maintained and that development is limited to an extent that doesn't create the feeling of coalescence, which is what the new emerging policy in the new plan wants to discourage. It's also worth noting that the current local plan makes comment in respect of Seaton as being the level of commercial services for the resident population now that the new Tesco supermarket has opened is seen as appropriate to discourage travel to other towns. However, community facilities, school, health, social and cultural are seen as borderline or inadequate with no capacity to serve additional residents. That's what's in the current local plan. That was done several years ago, as we all know, but there is nothing that I can see as a local resident which has actually served to mitigate or make any substantive alteration to those observations. So I do not see how further development can be justified. Furthermore, in the in the emerging local plan, it says Seaton is home to around 7,500 people, making it the fourth largest settlement in East Devon. It has one of the most elderly age profiles of any settlement in the district, with 45% of residents aged 65 or over. This is reflected in a relatively low potential workforce in Seaton. Nevertheless, the number of jobs in Seaton is lower than the number of workers, 0.73 jobs per worker, meaning that many people have no option but to commute elsewhere to work. Just over a third of residents work in Seaton, with Exeter, Axminster and Sidmouth being the next most popular places to work. That is what is in the emerging local plan. Effectively, if you're adding more population to Seaton, you're only going to put more strain on existing services which are wholly inadequate, and you're only going to encourage more people to have to travel to more different places to actually find work, should they need it. So again, I cannot see the justification for the allocation of these sites.
Thank you. Mr. Mason, could I ask you to wrap it up, please?
I've had my 3 minutes.
Yes.
Okay, well, there's obviously a lot more I could say, but I haven't got the time. But I think you get the gist. Thank you.
Next up then, Mr. Richard Eyre from Baker Estates.
Thank you once again. This land, as described earlier, is a good example of strategic planning for Seaton, with a mix of uses that will contribute to the social, environmental and economic well-being of the town. There is some further context in that a large part of this land is already allocated in the existing local plan for development. The reason it has failed to come forward is a lack of value in the allocation in order to be able to deliver what the land is allocated for. This allocation would put that right and give a critical mass and a mix of uses that makes delivery much more certain. Hence, we support what is recommended by the officers in their report and their assessment. We have an application in currently, as we've heard, which means that in this instance, there's been much more scrutiny to this site than most other sites before you. So there's a strong evidence base, in other words. The application has demonstrated the ecology constraints identified can be overcome through a successful habitat regulation assessment, which has been passed by your ecological officer and Natural England. This means that there will be no adverse impact on the integrity of the SAC. So this process has demonstrated that ecology is not a constraint or an impediment to development on this site. Landscape impact is limited as specified in the officer assessment, and the land is not an important contributor to the Green Wedge policy aims. It does not threaten coalescence between Seaton and Colliford and retains the settlement identity. The ecology and landscaping mitigation measures included to the north of the land in our current application means that an effective and permanent end to the development of Seaton can be achieved, and the development can be well integrated into the landscape at the new edge of the town. Access can be achieved and drainage improvements provided, as we have also demonstrated through our current application, satisfying the Highways Authority, the Environment Agency and the Lee Flood Authority. In other words, there are no fundamental constraints to development, and those constraints that do exist can be overcome. This has been demonstrated and accepted by statutory consultees in responding to our planning application. The opportunity therefore exists through allocation of this land to identify key job creation, housing delivery and infrastructure and environmental enhancements that will very much benefit the town. We can deliver the residential, recreational and environmental opportunities, while there's another party who is looking to deliver the commercial and other job creation opportunities. The result will be a great outcome and investment in the town in a well-planned and strategic manner that also contributes to meeting wider needs. We therefore hope you will confirm the allocation of this land so the long-awaited benefits of the development can be delivered in short order. Thank you.
Thank you. And lastly on our public speaking list for this site then, Councillor Hartnell.
Thank you, Chair. So most of my comments that I made for seat 03 are the same for seat 05. So essentially, the concerns about flooding are still there. I know Councillor Howe tried to suggest otherwise, but whilst the site itself, any development there may well make sure it doesn't flood itself, it's too late after it's built if there are issues for those houses that are already around it. So I still have concerns around the overall strategy around building houses and worrying about flooding afterwards. That said, I think seat 03 and 05, again, reluctantly, they are going to come forward for housing. It's going to be a mixed-use site. The employment opportunities on seat 05, I think, will help address issues around job creation in Seaton. And, the reality is it's 130 houses now, or 200 houses plus, if we don't meet our targets and get this plan over the line. So stuck between a rock and a hard place, Chair, I'm afraid. Thank you.
I do sometimes wonder if this committee needs to be renamed the Rock and a Hard Place Committee. Coming into committee then, members. I saw Councillor Ingham first. Sorry, Councillor Hayward.
Yes, Chair. I'm pleased that this site includes employment land. It's no good building houses for people to live in if there's no jobs, because you end up like Pembrokeshire or West Cornwall, where most of the residents are visitors for 6 months of the year, and the people that do live there have no future if they're 18 to 25, no jobs. So it's really important that we do that. Interesting to listen to what Marcus said, if not here, where I hear his concerns with regards to, water. We have to allocate somewhere, and I think these are the right ones, and I would hope, Chair, that once we've done this one, and I'm going to, propose adoption, allocation, that we can leave Seaton alone. Then we come back and revisit. We bear in mind what we've done and what we've allocated to Seaton and what's reasonable expectation for them to tolerate. Chair, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ingham. We have a proposal to allocate seat 05. Does anybody wish to second that? Councillor Davey, thank you. Okay, I have Councillor Davey, do you wish to speak now or later?
I do.
Okay.
Yeah, just to say, still grade 2 land, I noticed. It seems as though the two sites, I think it's been mentioned, 3 and 5 go together. I noticed in the report there's something about a long-held ambition for Seaton Football Club to relocate, although Councillor Ledger tells me they're quite happy where they are, so I'd be quite interested in some clarification on that. the fact it's mixed use and that there is a proposal for some employment land is welcome, I think. Might enable the provision of some local facilities or at least some jobs. I'd be quite interested in whether there's been any indicative suggestion as to what that employment land could be used for. Are we talking light industrial? Are we talking retail? But just whether there's been any sort of suggestion what that might be. Thank you.
I think that one of the ward members can possibly answer that for us in a moment. So I'll continue through my speakers list rather than bothering Mr. Freeman. Councillor Hayward.
Thank you, Chair. I'm grateful to the speakers from the public who spoke earlier because they've summed up the problem we are facing. And this problem relates whether we're looking at sites in Exmouth or Honiton or Sidmouth or Axminster. And that's the delivery of commensurate infrastructure to support the housing. And Mr. Freeman has outlined at the very beginning, for members of the public who weren't here then, that isn't actually a requirement of this function. It's a national problem, it's a problem for the planning committee, and there are things that the planning committee can do. This essentially is establishing the principle of whether a site is suitable for housing. We all know there is an infrastructure gap. There's a gap both in terms of provision and most importantly in terms of funding, certainly doctors, dentists and everything else. However, on this site, I'm more reticent, and I personally think there's more potential for some environmental harm to the Seaton wetlands immediately to the east. And whilst I welcome the inclusion of economic and retail space as shown on the map, and I also come back to a point that was raised from someone about the need for jobs. Well, Seaton has a high proportion of economically inactive people, and those residents need people to serve their needs, serve care needs, serve social care needs, serve retail needs. And so those people have got to have somewhere to live. And unless we potentially force everyone who's living in a 4 or 5 bedroom house on their own to move out, and I'm not an advocate of that government mandated practice, you've got to build smaller houses, you've got to build places where people can live. But on this basis, as I said earlier, this for me is a more pressing point of that issue of the green wedge above and the coalescence towards Colliford. So on this, I'm actually going to propose an alternate motion to Councillor Ingham that we move on from this. We essentially park this one, and if we have to come back to it and reassess, then we can. But I think my proposal is we move on. I welcome the employment land, but I think with the inclusion of the two we've already added into the mix, and we've still got others to look at in Seaton, that this for me is just a little bit too much. It's pushing that envelope a little too far, and I'd like to park this one for the time being, Chair.
So I think, unless my memory fails me, we already have a proposal that's been seconded. Sorry, Councillor Hayward. So unless the proposer and seconder wish to withdraw it, no. Okay. But I'll come back to you in the event that the motion fails. Councillor Ledger.
Thanks very much, Chair. With this site, I'd like to see us retain its current allocation. I don't see the merit of eroding into the green wedge as much into this site. I can't understand why I draw parallels this morning with the Sid Ford sites that we said the site, the employment site hasn't come forward because of the lack of interest. I just think that we've already heard today that there's been 3 applications on this for housing. I think that's the reason it hasn't come forward. We have another application in planning at the moment for use of the employment space. And what I'd like to see is us push forward with our previous plan and retain this as employment. That's what Seaton desperately needs. I'm not, you've seen from my previous proposal, I'm not against development, but I think it should be strategic in the town. there is already light industrial in this area. We should expand it out slightly, encourage jobs into the area and serve the people of Seaton. I understand the priorities that we've got for the district and the challenges that we have, but for additional housing, I don't think this is the location for it. I think we should keep with our current location, allocation, and promote a commercial use.
So on that point, I have asked Mr. Freeman to pull up maps of the existing allocation and Green Wedge against the planning application, just to contextualise Councillor Ledger's point. We will have to give him a minute to do so.
Yeah, that's fine, Chair. I haven't gone into any of the ecological sensitivities or anything around the wetlands because those points have already been made. But my point on employment, I think, is key to here. We've heard from the public speaker the figures relating to Seaton. I just don't think we're being strategic if we just go, they have loads of houses, but barely any employment.
No, that's okay. Valid point, well made. We'll get Mr. Freeman to pull those documents up for us. With that in mind then, does anybody else wish to, it's been a long day, wish to speak on this allocation? Councillor Ingham?
Just in general terms, Chair, I note when we looked at Sidmouth this morning and we heard that there's somewhere between 7,000 and 8,000 dwellings currently, population 13,000, houses allocated about 200. Then we look at Seaton, which is, be interested to know the population and the current number of dwellings, and we're looking for 250, you know.
300 homes in that space.
Okay, so I'm just mindful of the fact that we ask one community to provide far more housing than another one. And they're both coastal towns. They've both got the same issues of a national landscape or coastal preservation area and green wedges. But, you know, we're asking more of Seaton than we were this morning of Sidmouth.
So my glamorous assistant and vice chair here has pulled up the ONS figures from 2021. Seaton is, according to them, and excluding the small area in West Seaton that's in Beer and Branscombe, is 3,600 households and 7,100 people. And committee are considering recommendations from officers to allocate 284 homes and 2.2 hectares of employment land. If that answers your question, Councillor Ingham. Councillor Hayward.
Thank you, Chair. I think there's a pertinent point to make in a follow-on to Councillor Ingham's point. Everyone here from the public is concerned. They love Seaton, they love living there, and they love where they live. Last week we had people from Exmouth. No one from Seaton was there. Today, I can't see anyone I recognise here from Axminster. And when we consider Axminster's applications, I very much doubt there'll be anyone from Seaton. It always becomes a little bit parochial. And to take Councillor Ingham's point, when we get to Axminster's allocation, I don't want to prejudge or predetermine what we're going to discuss. Axminster is the second smallest conurbation settlement in East Devon, with about 2,600, 2,700 dwellings. And that allocation is going to be 1,000 plus. So yes, every town has to play their part, but I would just echo for this committee, as you'll consider, some towns are being expected to put far more into the pot than others. Seaton and other coastal towns are constrained by their geography. You can't build in the sea, you can't build in rivers. And a lot of the time you have, for Seaton's example, you have Beer immediately to the west and Colliford immediately to the north. It's constrained, it can only build in certain places. Places like Axminster, it's open season. It's just countryside. We're not protected by Airbnbs. So I take your point, Councillor, entirely that, but I don't think you can draw those parallels, because if that were the case, Axminster would be asked to build, 10 houses and that would be it. It's not. Everyone is being asked to do different things, and that's the challenge, and I know, that's the constraints we have to work to. So that's the difficult decisions we're making. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hayward. I believe we can now come to Mr. Freeman, who has some maps and some policies to show us.
Right, so yes, sorry, I'll just try and do this in a logical order. So this is the master plan for the application that's currently being considered. So that shows you the extent of the residential elements within the site. Hopefully you can see that's sort of this area here and this area here. That amounts to up to 130 homes. This is an outline application at this stage. There's a commercial element retained in this grey area here, which we don't have many details at this stage, and obviously linked to this is the football pitch, which is over on seat 03. The other point to make in terms of the current position is that the allocation in the current local plan is for a mixed use of employment and recreation purposes. There's no housing element to the current allocation, and the employment element can be up to 55% of the site, but it's not prescribed specifically. The issue with that, and picking up on Councillor Ledger's point, and I think the reason why it hasn't been delivered is it's simply not viable. There isn't money or any significant money to be made from the delivery of commercial units. And so the funding for delivering the recreation element, or indeed in this case the football pitch, which is desired, just wouldn't be realised from that proposal, which is why through the discussions we've had with Baker Estates over the years have demonstrated that a residential element is needed if you're going to achieve that outcome and retain the employment element and also deliver the football pitch. So if I just turn to, sorry, I'm going to have to go back to this, but I'll turn some layers off. To this, you can see that in the adopted local plan, the boundaries in relation to the built-up area boundary and the green wedge were drawn around the allocation. So in effect, what we're talking about now is extending that extent of the allocation to include these areas to the north and this area, this sort of foot of land coming down to the south and east of the existing allocation. And as has been pointed out, including this residential element, which I think is key to deliver anything here, really. In terms of the green wedge, I would make the point that green wedges are often thought of as a moratorium on development. That isn't the case. They are effectively areas in which we are mindful through the planning process that development in those areas could lead to settlement coalescence and could undermine the independent identity of adjoining settlements, and that we need to give serious consideration to those areas, those issues within those areas. But it isn't a moratorium on development, and I think the committee probably need to ask themselves whether or not reducing the green wedge in this area is going to have a significant impact in terms of settlement coalescence or the independent identity of Seaton and Colliford as separate settlements. And I think it's useful to look both at the extent of the change in terms of that plan, but also if I show you an aerial photograph of what's actually on the ground in that area, particularly if I can get rid of the hatching. Apologies, doing this on the hoof. It's not gone. There we go. So the extra area we're talking about is this field here, the northern part of this area, and as I say, this foot coming down here, and you can see that there's quite a significant copse of trees in here, a further copse of trees in here, and quite strong tree belts through here and here, which mean I think actually in landscape terms the material difference of removing these areas from the green belt to its purpose of delivering settlement, so green wedge, in terms of its purpose in terms of preventing settlement coalescence and the independent identity of the adjoining settlements is you know, there is an impact, I'm not going to lie, and I think that's was identified in the appeal decision previously, which residents have spoken about. But you know, circumstances have changed in terms of the availability of alternative sites, better alternative sites, and we simply don't have sites that are less harmful than this to allocate at this time. Whereas in the past and at the time of that appeal decision, we did have alternative sites and we were meeting our housing needs through those alternative sites. So I would just make that point while members are considering that. I think the other point while I'm speaking was, I think Councillor Davey was asking about the requirements of the football club. I think previously there was an aspiration to relocate the entire football club to this site, which was part of the justification of the previous allocation for recreation purposes on this site. I think, you know, obviously proposals haven't come forward for that. Again, I think there are viability issues with that. So the proposal currently, I think, is just for this additional pitch, as has been said, for youth purposes to satisfy the additional land and pitch requirements of the club whilst retaining their existing facility alongside. Hopefully that clarifies a few things and helps members in their deliberations.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman. Okay. Am I right in thinking we have a proposal on the table to allocate this site? I'm sorry, it's been a hot minute. Who was it from? Councillor Ingham and Councillor Davey. Thank you for reminding me. Would anybody else like to speak on this site? Councillor Parr.
Yes, again, whatever Mr. Freeman has said, it's the perception of separation that the green wedge delivers, because when you come along the other road, which nobody has mentioned, the road from Colley Ford through to Seaton, not the 3052, but the other lower road, at the moment, Seaton has a green setting, and the more the houses creep into that green setting, the less there is that perception of a countryside in between settlements. And I think we have to be incredibly careful, because if this site is allowed, it does erode that green wedge. I regret very much that it's a site larger than in the existing local plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Parr. Okay, last call then for speakers before we go to a vote. Is it very quick, Councillor Ingham?
Yeah, very quick. It's just yet again, during the emergence of this local plan, we're told time and time again by officers and some councillors, well, of course, green wedge only exists while we want it to, you know, and that's all negotiable during a local plan. That's new to this local plan. No one ever said that during discussions for previous emerging local plans. So you really have to make it quite clear to the public what we're going to do moving forward. Are these green wedges of little worth during emerging local plans, or do we actually mean what we say? And we'll have to make that clear, Chair, because it's misleading at the moment. A lot of people have misunderstood that the rules of engagement as we've come into this local plan.
Okay, with that said then, I will take us to a vote on seat 05. We have the proposal from Councillor Ingham, seconded by Councillor Davey, to allocate seat 05 for mixed uses. Those members in favour? 6. Those members against? 2. And abstentions? 1. Okay, seat 05 is carried then. As we've been going for nearly an hour and a half now, can I suggest a quick 5-minute comfort break and we'll reconvene at 3:30? for the benefit of members of the public in the room, I would get us started, but if I did, we wouldn't be quorate. So we're just waiting for one of two of the other members to come back in. Welcome back, Councillor Hayward. Yes, I know the feeling. Okay, we'll move on then. Councillor Parr will just have to join us as soon as she can. Next up, we have seat 08, and I have a Mr. David Morgan. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. I would like to support the recommendations made in the local plan that this site is not suitable for allocating for housing or employment purposes. Any development on this site would have an adverse impact on the topography and skyline on the western boundary of Seaton. In the case of this site, it can be seen from multiple viewpoints, such as Seaton Beach, the mouth of the River Axe, and the area of outstanding natural beauty on the eastern side of the River Axe estuary. As such, this site has a high landscape sensitivity to development. It is also in the coastal preservation area. This site is also shares a landscape characteristic of type 2A, which is in the East Devon Landscape Character Assessment, where the plan is to retain undeveloped horizons at the top of the scarp, and these often form from the skyline in views from below, and any development here would be very prominent. Due to the rising character of the area towards the skyline on the western and northern boundaries of Seaton, this site should be protected, not built on. This is particularly important as it is adjacent to 2 prime agricultural fields to the north and south of it, so any development on this site could potentially set an unwelcome precedent for this part of Seaton, which would damage its unique and very special topography. The site is also well known for an abundance of vegetation that helps promote habitats for a variety of species, which the site selection report did not pick up on in its methodology. I can personally vouch that the species seen by local residents include adders, grass snakes, field mice, foxes, badgers, bats, deers, and various species of owls. So, in other words, the ecology is a major constraint for this site. The position of this site on the western boundary, overlooking the town, would not likely contribute to affordable housing provision being made. And development would not integrate well into the landscape either because of its prominence on the sloping topography there. It also serves as an important fire break between the built-up area and the adjacent woodland of Cwtchel Coppice. And there is no vehicular access across this site or the adjacent fields to provide entry into Cwtchel Coppice for fire response vehicles. And we have in the last few years had several wildfires in Cwtchel Coppice. And finally, the existing sewage pipework in Cheston Rise is already struggling. In recent years, it has required 3 major repairs to be carried out to numerous pipelines underground, which is, as I say, the sewage pipeline. And there are already indications of further work likely being required in the near future as the road in Cheston Rise is sinking in places. Therefore, it would not likely be able to cope with the demand from additional dwellings being built.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. That's the
So I hope you will go with the recommendations in the report. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I have no further members of the public registered to speak on this site, and the recommendation is not to allocate, which I'm happy to move from the chair in accordance with officer's recommendation. Do any members of committee wish to speak? No? Okay, in which case can I ask all those in favour of the Proposal to move on, that's unanimous. Okay, we come then to site Seaton 09, and we have Mr. John from Bell, Cornwall. Welcome back.
Thanks, committee. This is a smaller proposal within the Seaton 01 site that you considered earlier. The main concern I think that the members had, you guys had, was the impact on the coastal preservation area. This is an extremely modest proposal, and I'm absolutely 100% confident that it would have no impact whatsoever in terms of visibility on the coast. It could be delivered without need for any access because you can rely upon the existing access. It's tucked into the southwest corner, the lowest part, and it's surrounded by housing and by the woodland. It's low-lying, and therefore, you know, I think it's a small opportunity site for you guys. Makes a small contribution, but nonetheless an important one, and still benefits from the sustainability attributes that I described earlier in terms of its ease of access to the town centre and so on, and so forth. So I would urge you to consider it an allocation. As you fully recognise, this is the town is a location where you need to optimise the amount of housing to meet the government and your own housing requirements. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. John. Okay, I have no further members of the public registered to speak. Coming into committee, Councillor Hayward.
Thank you, Chair. Following on from our earlier discussions about the larger site, and thank you for the speaker for his comments. Again, I come back to the point about the actual density. I appreciate there's a methodology, and I understand that perhaps Mr. Freeman could confirm that in terms of this designation of 7 dwellings, then I don't think you can compel for any affordability proportion, but there'd be a contribution perhaps as a part of 106, or perhaps not even that. But on this one, I am minded to propose approval of this very small scheme, as the speaker said, as a contribution towards what we're trying to achieve, and the fact that it perhaps has far less impact than the larger site that was declined. So on that, I'm proposing approval of the site, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Hayward. Do we have a seconder? I'm afraid I don't think we have a seconder, Councillor Hayward. Sorry, Councillor Ledger.
I think this is a site that we can possibly revisit later down the line if we come to the end and there's a shortfall. It's one of them that, to my mind, is borderline. It's whether you can get access in through, well, whether we'd be happy to get access in through the rejected site into the smaller site. But no, I'd be happy to propose that we move on, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Ledger. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Brown. Does anybody else wish to speak on this site? No? Okay then, in which case we have a proposal from Councillor Ledger, seconded by Councillor Brown, to move on. Those members in favour? That's 5. And those members against? Quite right too, Councillor Hayward. So that's carried then, thank you. That brings us to site seat 10 for 12 houses not proposed for allocation, and we have Mr. Morgan.
Thank you very much. I apologise, this is going to sound quite repetitive, but I do support the recommendation in the local plan that this site should not be allocated for new housing. Any development on the site would have an impact on the topography and the skyline. It is worth noting that this site is visibly present from various elevated viewpoints in Beer Parish. Again, it's a site that attracts a lot of wildlife, and it is part of the distinctive characteristic of Beer Road in Seaton. So I've spoken about that. I don't believe it will contribute to providing affordable housing based on its location in the town, because the properties here tend to be fairly high value properties. And I don't believe this development would actually integrate well into the landscape, bearing in mind it is on a very steep slope. So I can't comment at all on drainage works for this site, but I would be concerned about it based on, as I say, it's a particular landscape characteristic. And I'm more concerned, obviously, about the impact it would have on the topography of that side of the town. So in summary, I support the recommendation in the local plan that this site is not suitable for housing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. Coming into committee then, does anybody wish to speak? Councillor Ledger?
Happy to propose that we move on, Chair. I think we had a report from Ed Freeman before where we looked at the worst case planning, and this area was one of them that was potentially could fall into the sea in 75 years' time in worst case scenario. So I don't think it's probably the best idea to be allocating houses there.
Thank you, Councillor Ledger. I will second that proposal. Does anybody else wish to speak? No? Okay, in which case then proposal from Councillor Ledger, seconded by myself, that we move on. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Which brings us then to sites 13A and 13B. 13A being the northern parcel proposed for allocation or recommended for allocation, and B, the southern parcel and not recommended. And we have Councillor Hartnell.
Thank you, Chair. So I agree with the recommendation for seat 13B that it shouldn't be allocated, but I also think 13A shouldn't be separated from that site. I think it should be treated as one site. There is an ancient scheduled monument which is in the ownership of East Devon District Council. It's a well-used field for recreation. I think having houses right next to it on seat 13A wouldn't be particularly pleasant, and I also think that there's the risk that there could be further Roman remains beneath seat 13A, and I think that may hinder any future development as well. So I think in light of the other allocations that have been approved here today, I think 13A and 13B should be treated as one and not allocated. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hartnell. Committee. Do any members wish to speak? Councillor Hayward.
Reluctantly, I disagree with Councillor Hartnell on this. I think the proposal, again, I can use that word again, is a pragmatic approach. I quite agree that 13B should be disregarded. I've walked through that site and in due deference to Ted Gosling, who recently passed away, he did a huge amount of work there and brought it to the attention of local people. But I think 13A, given its correlation to existing housing and access, has the potential for development without impacting too much on the SAM. So I again, it's always reluctantly, because we are mindful of these areas, but that we approve 13A with the segregation of 13B to be discounted. Chair, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hayward. So that was a proposal to accept 13A and move on from 13B. Councillor Hayward? Yes. Thank you. Councillor Ledger?
Thanks very much, Chair. I tend to agree with 13B. That's just a non-starter. It's a very well used field for recreation, dog walking. 13A has had quite a lot of comment from local residents. They are concerned regarding surface flooding in the area. But if that can be mitigated and there is no effects to residents of Axview Road, I can't see an issue. I can't see a reason why we were to reject it, knowing that some of the sites that we have approved today. Yes.
Okay, we have a proposal then to allocate 13A and move on from 13B, proposed by Councillor Hayward, seconded by Councillor Ledger. Do any further members wish to speak? No? Okay then, in which case we'll take them one vote at a time. Proposal to allocate 13A, those members in favour? That's unanimous. And to move on from 13B, those members in favour? That's unanimous. Okay, that brings us to the last Seaton site then, site 15. The proposal is not to allocate. I have no members of the public registered to speak. Do any members of committee wish to speak? No, in which case I'll move from the chair in accordance with officer recommendation that we move on. All those in favour? Councillor Ledger? Go on, quickly.
It's just with this site in general, so it's getting brought before us today for residential. Previously, it's been brought to us for a mixed use, I believe, for a hotel. What's happened there? Why are we just looking at the residential element of it and not the hotel element? And I just want clarification on that before we vote, please.
Okay, I will look to one of the officer team.
I think it came up this morning actually for that site on the edge of Sidmouth, and that what we're looking at allocating is housing and employment land rather than any other sort of related uses. It was submitted through the HELAR as a proposal for a housing site, so we've assessed it on that basis. There's no evidence in terms of a need for a hotel in this particular location, that we're aware of. So we've assessed on that basis. I mean, even if we were to assess it for a hotel, you can see the constraints for the site, and they're in the report in terms of the flooding and the county wildlife site, etc. So even if we were to consider it as a hotel, I think we'd still struggle with that to allocate it for that. So.
Okay, take two then. The proposal is to move on from site 15. All those members in favour? That's carried. Okay, that takes us to the end of the Seaton sites then, and brings us just up the road to Colliton, which I believe is a new agenda item. Am I right? Can somebody? Yes. Yes, thank you. Yes, agenda item 7B, sites at Colliton. And we start then, thank you both, with site Collie 02. Oh, sorry, Mr. Lane, do you want to introduce Colliton at all? Or? No? Okay.
Well, again, briefly, I mean, Colliton's slightly different to Seaton, for example, because it's in the third tier of the settlement hierarchy. So it's a smaller level of facilities. We're calling it a local centre in the emerging local plan. So it's got a reasonable level of shops and services in the centre there, and a GP and recreation grounds. Obviously not to the level of Seaton and some of the other larger settlements. Relatively few sites around the settlement that we'll go through now.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Lane. Take two then on site Collie 02A. And first up, as an objector, we have Mr. Richard Eyre. You've changed hats.
Not quite. I'll explain in a minute. So, last time for me today. I speak in relation to Collie 02, but actually as the promoter of Collie 03. So that probably explains it. Collie 02 is a prominent site as identified in the report assessment and is viewed to have a high medium landscape sensitivity. This is the same conclusion as for Collie 03, which you will consider next. The Highways Authority has indicated the access can be achieved from Clay Lane and Old Sidmouth Road. Similarly, they've indicated that Collie 03 can be accessed successfully from Fairview Lane. Impact on the historic environment in both cases is considered to be minimal. In relation to ecology, the impact on both sites is considered to be significant, moderate, adverse. Both sites are mainly Grade 3 agricultural land. From this comparison, it can be noted that conclusions on each matter are the same, so there's little to choose between the two potential sites, Collie 02 and Collie 03. With significant opposition to Collie 02, it would be a perfectly logical conclusion to not allocate Collie 02 and to allocate Collie 03 instead. The evidence produced and considered would make that a sound choice supported by evidence that the committee can point to. Collie 03 can be allocated for a similar level of development, and there is plenty of scope and opportunity to provide environmental enhancements to go with the development. An allocation of 49 on Collie 03 would be supported by Baker Estates as the promoter of the site instead of Collie 02, and the committee has a justification and evidence to do just that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Eyre. Not quite the change in hats that I thought we might be seeing, but there we go. Next up, I have Councillor Stenning from Colinton Parish Council.
Thank you. I hope you've all had the chance to read the email with the views of Colinton Parish Council, which was circulated and contained a number of bullet points. It is a very grave matter indeed, destroying the natural setting of Colinton. Collie 02A and B are above the town and widely visible. It is a field at the top of a very steep hill outside the built-up area boundary in open countryside. A planning application to develop the site was rejected by EDDC in 2016. Drainage from the site already causes flooding in Hillhead, Berners-Field Road, Clay Lane and Ridgeway Lane. Concreting and tarmacking the hillside will only increase the amount of surface water despite any attenuation devices, and it's a long way to the River Collie to dispose of. Berners-Field Road, which was dug out of this hillside, sits a great deal lower than the hill itself. The gardens on the southwestern side flood regularly, and residents are greatly concerned about how their privacy and safety will be protected. This skyline site can only be reached by single track lanes, one only 8 feet or less wide, that's Clay Lane. No new houses should be built in Colinton until South West Water seriously upgrades the sewage system, which is 140 years old. It has failed by being overloaded by the increasing number of houses it serves. Now it will be further overloaded with the addition of 72 houses currently being constructed at the former Ceramtech site. This development, which includes 14 affordable dwellings, will fulfil the housing need of the parish as stated in the 2022 Housing Needs Survey and provides 6 light industrial units. Where is the employment provision in these proposed strategic sites? South West Water has stated Colinton sewage treatment plant is at capacity, i.e. much too small, and said they would line the leaking pipes running above ground with a skin, yet nothing has been done. Their engineers visited last November. Colinton is at a critical mass with sewage leakages and manhole covers spewing effluent in the streets. We've had enough, so implore you not to give the go-ahead for 49 additional houses to join the sewage system. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stenning. It's worth saying if and when an application came forwards for any of these sites, sewage capacity would be one of the things that was looked at that stage. And folks may be aware that we've been deploying what's called Grampian conditions to prevent development actually happening until sewage infrastructure upgrades have taken place. So that would be a matter for that process rather than this one necessarily, but point absolutely taken, and you won't find any disagreement in this room, I don't think, on that note. At that point then, Councillor Arnott.
Thank you very much, Chair. I wasn't going to speak because I was confident that Councillor Stenning would get it right, and she has on behalf of the Parish Council. I'm just slightly stunned by the sheer chutzpah of our friend from Baker Estates at the back there, who's tried to do a little bit of that. So that's brought me here to the dais. Collie 2A, I don't have any difficulty with. On the basis that, as everybody has seen here today, we have to find numbers. It's horrible, but we have to find numbers. I think the real problem is Collie 2B. So if you look there, you can see that Collie 2A, in terms of how to get there by not terrible roads, it's okay. It is on the edge of town. And to a certain extent, the fate of Collie 2A was sealed when, with parish council backing, the affordable development, which is just below there, you can see, went ahead, whenever that was, 10, 12 years ago. It's very hard to rely on this argument of visibility, because that is already there, and Collie 2A, as far as I'm concerned, is not significantly higher. It may even be at the same level. I would ask committee, though, since I'm here, to look more carefully at Collie 2B, where Councillor Stenning is absolutely right. You can see a crossroads there to just below Collie 2B. Those, you are by that time, you are on more or less single track, going both that way and going that way. It is not somewhere where it is appropriate to put many more houses, and I think you're looking, it's another 24 there, isn't it? So that would be my contribution, Chair, that I know you're looking at Collie 2A and Collie 2B, that Collie 2A makes a kind of sense. Collie 2B doesn't make any kind of sense at all. And I won't come back for Collie 3, except to say I just disagree entirely with what the gentleman said. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Ronnet. Into committee then. Do any members wish to speak? I'm guessing Councillor Palmer. Yes, there we go.
Thank you. Well, I agree with the comments of Colleton Parish Council, and I do support them. In particular, this site, or these two sites, if developed, there will be significant harm caused to the setting of Colleton. The site has high medium landscape sensitivity to new development. That's from our own landscape officer. It's highly visible from the national landscape to the north of the town. It forms the backdrop to Colleton. It's part of an undeveloped skyline, and development would change that forever. I can't agree with the comments previously made about the affordable housing site. That was very difficult to get through committee on landscape grounds, but it was an exception site. It was outside the built-up area boundary. It was different. It had no open market housing at all. So I can't take that as a Trojan horse, so to speak. I don't think we should add to that if it did damage. Ecologically, this site is very sensitive. It's within the Beer Quarry Caves consultation zone. Need, there is no need. We've had just commenced the Ceramtech development of 72 houses. 14 of those will be affordable, and also they are going to put in 6 employment units. And the Devon Communities Together Housing Needs Survey in March 22 showed a need for 12 affordable houses, so that need will be met. We shall have open market housing, 72 houses in all with affordable and employment land. There's no offer of employment provision with this site, either A or B. To be sustainable, we should have employment with housing, and that's been said before about other sites. Devon County Council has stated there are insufficient primary school places. The secondary schools in Axminster, this is a 25-minute bus journey or 7 miles by car, and that's obviously the same if you want to get to the station. Accessibility, the highway network has been mentioned, I'm amazed Devon County says okay. they are single track roads. Clay Lane is virtually a footpath. It's been completely impassable for years until suddenly, for some reason, they resurfaced it. Some of that's already been taken away. But anyway, these are the narrow lanes that connect that site to the town and main roads. We've heard about the sewerage system. I mean, we have got sewerage coming out of manholes by a bus stop. Children from school walking home being splashed by sewage, raw sewage there. We do need joined up thinking. Collerton has been designated as a local centre, but the primary school won't have capacity, and there's no employment going to be provided with these houses. We've got inadequate sewage system. Your comments say contribution to spatial strategy. This development will help maintain the town's role as a local centre. Well, without infrastructure to support the town, Collerton can't be a local centre, and housing alone will not help Collerton to maintain that role. So I really think both these sites should actually be, we should go pass them on at the moment and see what other sites we come up with. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Parr. I have to say I disagree, but there we go. I'll see what other members of committee have to say first. Councillor Hayward.
Thank you. I find myself in partial agreement with Councillor Parr, certainly in O2B. I mean, I'm looking at the street view from Clay Lane Cross through a farm gate across the valley, looking northeast across the valley, and it's a gorgeous view of Collerton Village. Essentially, it's your quintessential English view. As you drive down roads, you come across hamlets and villages, and you look across them. And in fact, from that view, I think I can see what appears to be Kilmington and probably Axminster in the far distance. So in terms of it will be, incongruous, because you'll see houses. You can see houses everywhere you go on our country lanes. I appreciate there's a view of ridge lines, but, houses have roofs. There'll always be ridge lines. But I do agree, looking at this road, the junction, that these roads are single track roads. But as you progress further towards the village, you come to better roads, and there is better access in those estates that are nearby. So it's a split, really, a split decision that we would approve, or my proposal is we include 2A, but we move on from 2B in this instance, Chair. Thank you.
Is that your proposal, Councillor Hayward?
It is, yes.
Okay. Do we have a seconder for approving 2A and moving on from 2B? Councillor Ledger, do you wish to speak? Okay. Does anybody else wish to speak? Councillor Brown?
I mean, the Serentic site that's gone up there recently, I mean, there was lots of problems with that, with drainage, water and everything like that. In fact, Councillor Allen at the time said, where does the water go? Who knows? If he doesn't know and he's the local councillor, I mean, who does know? It's not a fit site for development as such, really. There's so many problems with it. I mean, you can allocate the site, but whether you get the houses there is very doubtful. So what's the point of allocating it? Go and find another site somewhere else. Bring it back later if you haven't got enough properties.
I mean, I looked to Mr. Freeman on my left. I assume he wouldn't be considering it if we didn't have some evidence from the submitter that it was deliverable.
No, we wouldn't. I mean, I think the issue here really is that 2B would have a much greater landscape impact than 2A. That is the assessment. But the bottom line is not in a national landscape. And we are proposing to allocate sites in national landscapes elsewhere in the district in order to make up the numbers. as Councillor Hayward has said, you know, there are lots of beautiful fields and views in our districts, and we're very lucky to benefit from them. But many of them you can see settlements and villages, and in the context of houses, I appreciate people probably cherish the views of this site and across the settlement. But unfortunately, we're in the very sad position of having to meet the housing needs and the housing numbers we're given in the least harmful places. And because this isn't a national landscape, although it would be harmful to the landscape, we reluctantly had to move from this being what was previously, I think, a second choice site in terms of 2B, to bring it in as a recommended allocation to help to adjust the numbers. While I'm speaking, I think there were a number of comments about the access. I mean, I don't see any reason why the whole site couldn't be accessed through 2A, where the road is notably wider and better at that point. And a lot of the other issues are detailed design issues around drainage arrangements, and the sewage and infrastructure issues are common across much of the district. So I'm struggling to see what would distinguish this site. And if we do move on from this site, how we're going to find any better sites to make up the 25 homes that we'd have to find elsewhere.
I think, Mr. Freeman, you've just said my entire speech for me,
Apologies,
and saved me the trouble. So thank you very much for that. However, we do have a proposal that's been made and validly seconded to allocate 2A and move on from 2B. Do any other members of committee wish to speak? No? Okay, in which case we go to a vote. We'll take them one by one. So 2A, the proposal is to allocate. Those in favour? 4. Those against? 2. 2B, the proposal is to move on. Those in favour? That's 4, and those against? That's 2. Okay, so both those are carried, which brings us then to Collie 03, which is not proposed for allocation, and we have Councillor Stenning. Do you wish to speak on 03? You are on my list. Okay, in which case then? We have, Councillor Arnott, okay.
Thank you, Chair. Just to thank the officers for an excellent report on Collie 03, and as ward member to agree entirely with the findings and the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Arnott. Do any members of committee wish to speak? Councillor Ledger.
Just understanding what we've agreed for 2A and 2B with the issues regarding landscape. Is there any merit that if we were to say we move on today, that there is, by reducing the size of this site, any difference to the landscape issues within it?
Mr. Freeman, Mr. Lane, Mr. Coles?
That would make it acceptable.
Could we take another
in
look
future.
at this one? Is there any merit?
Well, if I start, and then James might want to add, as I think he did the assessment of this one. I mean, my reading of the report is that this site is even more sensitive in landscape terms. I think, as gentleman from Baker Estate said, I think the overall conclusion says high medium landscape sensitivity, but if you read the details of the report and the assessment, I think it's quite clear that this is more sensitive in landscape terms. Whether or not there, I mean, as you'll see, as we've gone through the sites, you know, we have tried to break down sites into smaller areas and identify parts of sites that would be acceptable. So my understanding is that our view is that there isn't any mileage in doing that. James is nodding. I don't know if you want to add anything, James.
Yeah, obviously, I definitely agree with what you're saying, Ed. I haven't specifically looked at this site to see if I could split it down to anything smaller, but I would say it is more sensitive from a landscape point of view, in my mind, than Collie 02. If you were going to develop just a part of this site, it would be the part closer to the built-up edge. But if you were to do that, I've got no idea how you'd access it.
To my mind, it would be the same argument as we had for Thursday, where the long ways are Okay, thank you, Mr. Coles, for clarifying that one. I must say I broadly agree with the assessment that's been set out, so I'm going to propose that we move on from this one. From the chair, does anybody else wish to speak? No, okay, in which case, proposal is to move on. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Which brings us then to Collie 06, and we have Councillor Stenning.
This is the only site available to build a new primary school to educate the increasing number of children expected to live in Colleton, with the 72 houses under construction and even more now that you've given the go-ahead to Collie 02A. It has been earmarked by the Parish Council for a new school for over 20 years. It's a central site, has 2 car parks, space for sports and play on the Peace Memorial playing fields, and is next door to the preschool, nursery and youth centre. The existing school site is landlocked and children are being taught in mobile classrooms built on the playground. This site could be sold and developed for housing, which would partway fund the new school. Applying for a new school to be built takes time, but our Devon County Councillor Marcus Hartnell supports the retention of this site for the longer-term priority of a new school. I think it's a great opportunity.
Councillor Arnott.
Thank you, Chair. So I would strongly agree with what Councillor Stenning has just said. I'm mindful of the difficulties. Marcus, as our county councillor, is indeed, as I would be, totally supportive of retaining this site. It is the only place where our primary school could ever go. There is no other site. And the primary school is just bursting at the seams now. It would make a huge amount of strategic sense for it to move down to this piece of land. The difficulty we've got is that we're aware that Devon County Council haven't got the investment allocated to help the community build it. On the other hand, we can surmise that the existing site of the primary school probably has a really serious premium value for it for redevelopment. But also, unfortunately, nobody's begun any actual work on this at all, which puts us in a difficult position now. I would love it if there was a way in which this committee could in some way bear in mind it's where the primary school ought to be going. If you're unable to bear that in mind, I'd ask you to look at the site itself, which I think what the community understood is that it was going to be like a ribbon development. It was going to just continue down the line of Collie Road and that you might have a row of houses along there. I don't think what anybody expects is if you see the top of the site where it goes in behind some houses and there's a little sort of footpath called Ham Lane behind, which floods constantly. I mean, we're almost at river level there anyway, which is why the other site to the right has been recommended for exclusion. That funny little extra bit, I don't know how that's come into the equation. So to me, that needs further analysis. But coming back to Councillor Stenning's point, I completely agree, but I just don't know what we can do, or within the constraints of what you're trying to do today, Chair, I don't know how we achieve it. But yes, it should really be a school site, and really we should, to be fair to this council, that idea should have been brought in here for us to consider some years ago, probably. I don't know if it's too late.
Thank you, Councillor Arnott. I'm just checking with Mr. Freeman to my left. We have no submissions from Devon County that say they want to keep the site for a primary school. They are the statutory consultee. Indeed, as the Education Authority, they say, not I, they say, Colleton Primary has capacity. That's the evidence that Devon County have put in front of us as the statutory authority. I'm advised by the voice to my left that there's not really a huge amount that we can do on that front, irritating as I know that must be. Members of committee, does anybody wish to speak? Councillor Parr.
Thank you. Picking up on your point, actually, on the O2A and B, the Devon County Council comment said there are insufficient primary school places. And blah, 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 I haven't got it in front of me, but clearly that school is not coping. And with this allocation that you've just agreed, it certainly won't be, let alone if there are any more children from outlying villages that want to come here. So I really agree with the two previous speakers. It's important that this site is not built on for housing, and that we should look into the possibility of it being a site for the schools, and for that reason I'd like us to move on with this one.
Okay, I have to go for a seconder for the proposal to move on. Councillor Hayward, are you seconding?
Yeah, I'm happy to second it, just with a couple of really caveats to support that. All the arguments that have been put forward, I'm just obviously mindful of a place called Tipton St John, which is evidence of what happens when you build a school on somewhere that periodically, methodically floods, and the issues that comes with that. That's what's perhaps is influencing Devon County Council's comment on this. Also for the parish council and this district council in the future, an understanding that if you did move the school to here, there would naturally be, I suppose, a consideration of using that site for housing. And it's again a case of be careful what you wish for, because for those people who say that, you know, access on Sidmouth Road, the issues of flooding, the issues of water movement, etc., if you built on that site, you'd have exactly the same problems. And actually, we know it's quite a constrained site to get to, having driven there quite a few times myself. So I'm happy to second the proposal that we reject both 6A and 6B. But what happens thereafter is another issue. But I suppose all we're doing is accepting or rejecting, and I'm happy to reject both.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Hayward. Just to clarify, the proposal is to move on, not to reject.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chair, for correcting my terminology.
Not at
To
all.
move on both.
Thank you. Just on the primary capacity point, Mr. Freeman and I have checked the various reports, and the line from Devon County is, and I quote from the papers here, Colleton and Seaton primary schools have some capacity to support development, but not to total level, i.e. all of the sites that are proposed in the area. So there is some capacity across those two primary schools. I can only repeat the evidence that Devon County Council have put in front of us. They are the statutory authority. It's their schools. All that being said, we have a proposal seconded to move on from both of these sites. Councillor Ledger.
The issue that I have with that comment is that it includes Seaton and Colleton together, where they are separate primary schools. Seaton has more capacity. I don't believe Colleton has any, if at all, some. What I would like to see is us double check with the Educational Authority that they have no plans to come forward. And if they have no plans to come forward with a development plan on this site, then we should be allocating it. I don't think we should be saying, let's move on. It should be a case of we check with the authority. If they have no plans to approve it, then we approve and allocate the site.
So it's perhaps worthwhile adding there, this did come up at the working group meeting when we looked at the draft version of these papers, and the question was highlighted, and I believe there was an action to check. Unfortunately, Mr. Dickens, who took those actions, is on leave this week, so we don't know whether that question has yet been asked. I believe is the position, Mr. Freeman.
Yes, that's right. So we'll pick up that action and make sure it is action and we have a definitive answer going forward. The other thing I'd just say on school capacities, it's very easy to say based on the current position that there may not be capacity. Devon County, when they do these comments, have projection models as to what likely future capacity looks like based on current demographics. And obviously, members will probably be aware the birth rates are actually declining at the moment. And so their projections are that capacities will improve in future in most cases. So that may have informed their judgment in this case and may explain to some extent the difference between people's experience on the ground and what Devon County is saying. But yeah, if members need further reassurance on that issue before making any decision in terms of an allocation here, we can take that away and make sure that is actioned.
It's worth saying this is one of the reasons why we say move on rather than reject, so that we can tie things up at the end. So I think move on is probably compatible with us checking this and bringing it back if Devon County say, no, we're never going to put a school here. So if members are happy to proceed on that basis, I'll take us to a vote. Okay, in which case then the proposal, and we'll take 6A and 6B separately, is to move on from site 6A. Members, all those in favour? That's carried. And 6B to move on. That's carried both unanimously. That brings us then to the end of Colleton. Members, do you want a short break before we do beer brands coming up, Lime, or should we power through? Somebody express an opinion.
Get on with it.
Get on with it. Okay. We have no speakers for either site in Beer. We have no speakers for either site in Branscombe. And we have no speakers for the site in Upline. Mr. Hunter, if I propose that we move on from all 5 of these together and we take a vote on each, are you happy?
Take a separate vote.
Yep, take a separate vote. Okay, so before I do that then, if I come to members, does anybody wish to speak on any of these sites contrary to the officer recommendation? No, in which case I will propose from the chair that we move on from sites Beer 01, Beer 03, Bran 01, Bran 02 and Uplie 01. 5 votes then. The proposal is to move on from Beer 01. Those members in favour? That's unanimous. The proposal is to move on from Beer 03. Those in support? That's unanimous. The proposal is to move on from Bran 01. Members, those in favour? That's unanimous. The proposal is to move on from Bran 02. Those in favour? That's unanimous. And the last proposal of the day is to move on from site Uplie 01. Those in favour? That's unanimous. Okay. I believe then that brings us to the end of our agenda for today, the 11th of September. Thank you very much, members, for persevering with us. And we'll see you next week.